Hello, welcome to Geometry. This is lesson 1 of chapter 1, going over the 3 basic building blocks of geometry and vocabulary and symbols related to them. Starting with the first blanks, we have the 3 basic building blocks of geometry are points, lines, and planes. These 3 terms will define all of the definitions throughout this course. A point is the most basic building block in geometry, and it has no size, only location, such as point P, or point A, or point B. A line is a straight and continuous arrangement of infinitely many points, and it has infinite length but no thickness. So imagine you have infinitely many points and you put them all together and eventually you get a line. And this line will go infinite in two directions. Typically, we're going to label it with 2 points, such as A and B. So this would be line AB. Finally, a plane has length and width, but no thickness. It's usually indicated with this parallelogram-like shape. And you're going to use an uppercase script, capital letter. It's typically used to write it, so I'll do my best to write kind of a scripty looking P like that. I'll usually indicate it when you look at the textbook. You'll see this fancy looking uppercase letter. It's typically going to refer to a plane. Finally, points, lines, and planes are used to define all other terms in geometry that themselves are undefined terms. Undefined terms. In other words, they are the 3 terms that we use to define all of the other ones. Okay, so let's start with some words. Collinear. Collinear means that on the same line. So if we have points A, B, and C are collinear, that's going to mean that those 3 points are on the line. Coplanar means on the same plane. And if points D, E, and F are coplanar, then they are on the same plane. What about next? It's a line segment consists of 2 points called the end points. Of the segment, not segment. It should be segment. Okay. So here is line segment AB, and if it's written out, you would just put uppercase A, uppercase B with a line on top, or a segment on top. So here it is. Line segment AB is written using the symbol. It's written using, let's get our grammar right, using the symbol AB or BA. the line segment's distance can be written as AB equals 2 inches, and we only need one of those. Or the measure of line segment AB equals 2 inches. So if you're referring to the line segment figure, then you use AB with the line segment on top. Otherwise, so in this case, if you were referring to line segment AB, we would do this. If we're referring to the distance, then write an expression like that, or an equation like that. Next is something called segment addition. If points A, B, and C are collinear, and B is between A and C, then AB plus BC equals AC. So, for example, if you have, let's try to do a little straighter line. If you have a line here, and you have point A, point B, and point C, then it follows that we can assume that AB plus BC is equal to the distance from A to C. So the distance from A to B plus the distance from B to C equals the distance from A to C. Here's an example. Podunkville, Smallville, and Gotham City lie along a straight highway with Smallville between the other two towns. If Podunkville and Smallville are 70 kilometers apart, and Smallville and Gotham City are 110 kilometers apart, how far apart are Podunkville and Gotham City? And so we have Podunkville, Smallville, and Gotham City. So the distance from P to S is equal to 70. And the distance from S to G is equal to 110. And then the distance from P to G, what's that going to be? Well, that's just going to be 70 plus 110. Should be 180 kilometers, which you'll notice is what they have right there. Okay. And here's an important distinction. If you have an equal sign and you have a congruent sign, in geometry they mean two different things. So this sign here means equal, and this sign here means congruent. Equal refers to numerical expressions, in other words, numbers. So numbers are equal. If you see congruence, that's going to refer to figures like points, lines, planes, rectangles, triangles. Those can be congruent, or think of it like the same size and shape. So this refers to figures being congruent to each other, or the same size. And in geometry, we need to show that either segments or angles are the same size or are congruent, and we're going to do that with markings. And this is going to be important, that unless segments are marked congruent, we can't assume that they are. So notice here, these markings here indicate that AB is congruent. I should put a line segment on top, is congruent to BC. So by making identical markings. And in the quadrilateral SRQP, the double marks mean that SP and RQ are congruent. So these double markings here mean that these segments are congruent. The triple marks here means that SR and PQ are congruent to each other. So something that can come up is a midpoint. We'll have lots of midpoints in geometry, and a midpoint of a segment is the same distance from both endpoints. So for example, if you have a segment, maybe you have point A, and this is point B, and then right in the middle would be point M, and that's a midpoint. You'd mark it a midpoint. The midpoint bisects the endpoints, or in other words, divides the segment into two congruent segments, or two equal segments. And if a line passes through a midpoint of a segment, it bisects. It bisects the segment. So if this line goes through it, then it's said to bisect the segment. Okay, let's go ahead and do an example now. So on your own, before I do this in the video, study the segments below and name each midpoint and segment it bisects, and then name all the congruent segments. Go ahead and do that. Okay, so we have two of them. F bisects CD and K bisects JL. Now it looks like N bisects MP and it looks like F bisects EG2, but notice they're not marked. Or in the case of CD, you can see that they labeled those two segments 2 centimeters each, but they haven't marked them. And so that in this class and in geometry, we cannot assume they're the same length unless they're clearly marked the same. So congruent segments using the congruent symbol. Well, each of the midpoints would mean that CF, that segment, is going to be congruent to FD, and JK is going to be congruent to KL. And then we also have an isosceles triangle. So I can see that based on the markings here, HJ is congruent to segment HL. Next we have rays. So ray, such as ray AB, is a part of a line that contains the endpoint A and all points on AB that are on the same side of A as point B. In other words, down here, this is an example of a ray. We'll call it AB. And A, in this case, is the end point of the ray. And B is any point to the right of it. But over here, to the right, we can see we have another ray, BA. And the endpoint in this case is B, and then point A is another point on the ray. But this ray over here, this ray AB, you could also call this a Y. And that would be referring to the same ray. So in ray AB, the first letter A is the endpoint of the ray. And in BA, the first letter B is the endpoint of the ray. So here's an example. Name all the lines, rays, and segments in the figure. There's quite a few of them. Let's start with the segments. Okay, so we have MA, we have a T and TH. We also have MT and MH. And then we have AH. Go ahead and finish the rays and the lines on your own. Okay. Example, what's wrong with the following? AB equals CD. A couple things. This symbol means is equal to. But is equal to refers to numbers. But AB is a ray, which is a figure. And CD is a line. So can rays and lines even be equal? Well, no, we should be calling them congruent because they're figures, but even if it was congruent, even if we said congruent, a ray cannot be the same size as a line because a line is infinite in both directions and a ray is infinite in one direction. So a line cannot be congruent to a ray. That is a fact. So a line cannot be congruent to a ray. And the equal sign refers to numbers, whereas this refers to figures, which is what you would want in this case. Okay. Well, that concludes the lesson for 1.1. Make sure to finish all of the notes and have them ready for the start of class. Have a good day.